Harvard professor James Luther Adams traveled through Germany in 1936 and again in 1938. He had with him an early home movie camera on which he captured many of the foremost German church leaders of the time, both pro-Nazi and anti-Nazi. On this tape, we will see some of these leaders and hear Professor Adams reflect on his encounters with them. With Professor Adams are some friends and former students, including the highly regarded church historian George Huntston Williams and the late Father Theo Stamen of Boston College.
Okay, today is February the 25th, 1984. We're continuing our conversation with Professor Williams and Professor Adams about the underground church movement in Germany during the 30s.
And St. Paul wrote, "Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority but from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore he who resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. For rulers are not a terror to good conduct, but to evil." This text from the letter to the Romans in the New Testament was well known to all Germans. The reformer Martin Luther reinforced this tradition in the 16th century. It became a personal religious act to be loyal to one's country and one's leaders. 400 years after Luther, the Nazi Party tried to make this tradition of obedience and of reluctance to resist authority their own, although they became a terror to good, not to evil. It was a time of great change in Germany, and the excitement of change was felt by everyone. Germany was moving in a new direction, away from the humiliating defeat of World War I, away from the economic hardships, which were compounded by the crash of 1929, away from the harsh reparations and false boundaries imposed by the Versailles Treaty. On these bases, the National Socialist Party, the Nazis, were to move toward a strong, cosmically ordained Germany. They appealed to what many people felt was the holy destiny of their land and people. They promised a better life for the working man and a return to family values. They taught that a great leader, a Führer, would always arise in times of crisis. They developed a religious theory that God had assigned a special destiny to the Germanic peoples. Such views swept popular opinion and gripped the souls of the young. They conquered every sector of society. Each person had to decide where to take a stand. The deepest religious aspects of society were at stake. How did the church leaders, the pastors, the theologians, and ordinary believers respond to the social and ethical issues when they confronted Nazi philosophy? Here, Professor Adams tells of his encounters with religious leaders who became Nazis. Reichbishop Ludwig Muller was appointed by Hitler to be the head of the Nazi church.
And the Archbishop Muller, whom we'll see presently, said to me that on the first day on which I met Adolf Hitler, mein Führer, I realized that God had sent another hero for German culture. He said that he had decided that the best way to understand any religion was through the comparative study of the types of prayer. And I made some brief comments about the different kinds of prayer that one finds in the Orient and in Christianity, and then especially he stressed the difference, the uniqueness of prayer in Judaism. Whereupon he got up from the table, and it was a rather formal occasion again. He had invited some of the leading German Christians in for the occasion. He got up from the table and knelt on his knees and began to go up and down, gesticulating as in prayer, in a somewhat Jewish fashion, or Yiddish fashion, winding his hands in this fashion, and then saying, "Oh God, thou art great, I am nodding," and so on. And he got up and said, that's the way a Jew prays. You get the whole clue to Judaism from that Now we know the reason he does that. I am nodding. He prays that way in order to make a better deal. I asked him after we talked a while, but I said, you ought to show me how a German prays. Yes, I will do that. And he got up from the table and went to the end of this large dining room in the palace. We're in the palace of the Archbishop under den Selten. And he goose-stepped across the full length of the dining room. I remember with the butler standing there astonished. And he goose-stepped all the way, and at the end, clicked his heels, threw his hand in the air like that, and said, Heil Gott! Ich bin Deutsch. And he came back and explained it to me that God had created us racially. God had created us Germans, and our destiny was to fulfill our Germanity, and we would not get on the ground and grovel and say, I am nothing. We'd stand up proudly and say, Heil Gott, I am German, and be proud of that.
Alfred Rosenberg was chief ideologist of the Nazi Party. He developed theories of anti-Semitism and of racial destiny and a philosophy of nationalism. Rosenberg was later condemned to execution at the Nuremberg trials.
Well, I talked to him mainly to get him to expand on his notions of a worldview of Weltanschauung, and his claim that he was providing Germany with this, and that the authentic worldview would have to be a worldview in which the German mind was purged of these decadent and polluted elements coming from Jewish blood.
Emanuel Hirsch was perhaps the greatest intellect who became an apologist for the Nazi position.
When I called on Hirsch, when I took that picture of him, he spelled out a theory of vocation according to which everyone has his stance and obligations and special duties in life. And said he, the girl that just came in to serve us tea, she wouldn't be any good as a theologian, and I wouldn't be any good as a maid in the household. This is God's plan for men, and it also obtains for the nations. Each nation has its vocation under God, and our nation has, among other things, become properly aware of the threat to Christianity, a true Christianity, coming from Judaism and coming from the Old Testament.
The differences between proletariat socialism in the Marxist tradition and National Socialism in the tradition of Rosenberg and Hirsch were only partly clear to some critics of capitalism in Germany. While Paul Tillich and other German refugees declared against National Socialism, many who remained were ambiguous or accommodated to the spirit of the times. George Wunsch, the leader of the religious socialist movement, was a professor at Marburg University.
He adjusted himself to the Nazis in the sense of praising their welfare programs and their promise to bring about the unification of Germany where everyone would be participating in the economic benefits. And it was awfully difficult to tell the degree to which he was sincere, and therefore he was, by the confessing church people, he was considered a traitor. Then later, I had carried on a lengthy correspondence with the director of American military government for the universities in order to try to save Wunsch from dismissal. And my argument with the American military government in the matter was that the alternative for him was, since he'd been such a prominent Marxist socialist, a religious socialist, the only alternative for him was to risk martyrdom.
Yet there was resistance. Some who opposed the Nazi theology were well-known theologians who broke with the Germanized Christian traditions. by their recovery of a more classical philosophy or a more orthodox faith, they were able to resist the seductions of Nazi belief. One such person who spoke out against the Nazis was Karl Barth, one of the best-known thinkers of 20th century Protestantism. As the main author of the one and only anti-Nazi statement issued by church leaders, the manifesto of the so-called confessing church, the Barmen Declaration, he stressed that salvation comes only through Christ, that the Word of God must not be rewritten by any temporal leaders on earth. Here Professor Adams tells of Barth's insistent demands for a theological approach to the problems at hand.
At the first session, on the first day, the paper was given by the professor of systematic theology at the University of Geneva, Professor Lemaitre. After he had read his paper for about 10 minutes in this crowded, full hall, we heard a voice shouting from the back of the hall, and we turned and everybody recognized it was Karl Barth shouting, "Mr. Chairman, I want to ask a question. I don't want to wait. I want my question posed right now." And Professor Lemaitre said, "Well, I'll take it now." Which was a very foolish, a weak liberal, very foolish thing for him to do, because Barth said, "I came to Geneva with the expectation I was going to attend a Christian theological conference. And I must have come to the wrong place, and my question is, where am I going to go in order to find that theological conference? So far, I've heard this paper full of psychological and sociological and other non-theological opinions of no consequence to anyone who is interested in theology and das Wort Gottes. I have not heard it referred to once, das Wort Gottes."
The universalism of the Word of God, as Barth thought about it, was not the only source of anti-Nazi teaching. Albert Schweitzer, in his biblical criticism, as well as in his musicology and medical mission to the West Africans, exemplified a cosmopolitan, international, almost humanistic perspective, which was suspect to all Nazis. In the midst of such influences, the tension between ingrained nationalism and religious universalism tore at people's souls. Yet there was resistance, and those who resisted suffered for it. Martin Niemöller, who also thought on an international scale, was instrumental in establishing and keeping open lines of communication between those in the ministry inside Germany and those outside Germany. He emerged from World War II as one of the best-known theological resistors, having spent several years in a concentration camp at Sachsenhausen. Yet Niemöller, as a strong German patriot, began with a firm adherence to the statement of Paul about authority in government coming from God.
When the Nazis first came across the horizon and also into power, he offered himself as a previous submarine commander. He offered his services.
Chaplain.
Yes, he'd been a chaplain. And it was only later that he gradually came to a sharp disagreement. The sermon he preached that day was a tremendous thing. Unambiguous attack on the Nazi and on the racism, but especially of course, interference with the church.
The Nazi state issued a decree stating that no Gentile may choose a child's name from the Old Testament. And likewise, no Jew was allowed to choose a name from the New Testament.
The Nazis would go so far in their fanaticism as that. Well, they said that's perfectly within the authority of the state. I see no reason why a state may not make decrees. Well, I said, then that really amounts to you accept the state as its authority also in anti-Semitism. Well, he said, I just say that that's the jurisdiction of the state. And I would like to say that any Christian who violates this decree has no right to claim to be a martyr. I would not support him. He should obey the state.
The majority of Professor Adams' time in Germany was spent studying under the well-known liberal theologian Rudolf Otto. Professor Otto's work centered on the idea that all humans have a special faculty for recognizing that which is holy. Despite this and his strong liberal beliefs, he reflected the prevailing German desire for a government ruled by a Christian elite. Professor Adams' closest friend in Germany was a former classmate who had studied in this country, the anti-Nazi pastor, Peter Brunner.
I should perhaps tell about the very savage argument that Brunner and I had that almost ended our friendship. It seemed so that evening. We were so vigorous in our combat with each other. I happened to say to him, to ask him, well, what are you going to do? Obviously, we're going to have, this is going to end in war. And are you going to support the war? And he said, well, certainly. Incidentally, I know of no exception among the Barmen youth who resisted military service. They went into military service under Hitler. And he appealed to Paul on the ground that the appeal being that we have to be obedient to the authorities that God has given to us. And I said, I just can't see how you can do that. You've been in Dachau concentration camp. You risk your life every day speaking against Hitler recklessly. And now, if he only starts an international war, then you're going to support him. And we had a very long and extremely heated conversation about it. And I made some pretty reckless comments myself about how then St. Paul becomes the sanction for your fighting for Hitler in an international war. Well, I said, it's a Brummagem authority. It's a false authority. It's an authority that you reject and are now risking your life to oppose. Doesn't matter. If my country is at stake, I have to defend.
There were those who rose against the system nevertheless. James Luther Adams was one of the very few to have documented groups of resistors, such as these seminarians.
One of their major purposes was, first, to train ministers who were anti-Nazis to serve in churches and thus help them to complete their theological education. At this school, about 2 months after I left there, the Nazis came in and confiscated everything, took all typewriters, files, and everything, and the school was closed. Thereupon, the professors, in collaboration with the students, devised a scheme whereby they would meet at Frau so-and-so's on Monday afternoon for coffee, and that would be the course in historical theology. The next day they would meet at some other private home, and that was the course in New Testament. I came there according to the schedule we'd agreed on, and I got in the door. They were expecting me, and we talked a little while, and I still had my top coat on, holding my hat, and my suitcase was by my side, and one of the students said, "Oh, look, the police are coming." And we looked out through the window, and there they were, coming up the walk to the house. Whereupon, these anti-Nazi students went to some cupboards in the room and took a lot of anti-Nazi pamphlets that had just been published, protesting about the arrest of 2 young ministers, and stuffed all my pockets. I had my overcoat on, stuffed all my pockets, and pushed me out into the kitchen, and then went and answered the doorbell, and the police said that they had come to seize any remaining pamphlets. All of them had been signed by a minister in Düsseldorf and by one of the students living there. And the blonde fellow at the black there was one of the authors of the pamphlet that the police came to seize. And they said, well, he isn't here at the moment, but actually it's a rather embarrassing moment for you to be here. We have a young American theologian who's just arrived 5 minutes ago, and he's going to get a very bad impression. The first thing that happens to him here is the police come. And they said, well, it doesn't matter, it's a purely formal call, forget it, and they left immediately. And I didn't hear any more of that. From time to time, the anti-Nazi church people would make what was called a tulipenreise, a journey to the tulips, namely to Holland, in order to consult with each other and to consult with church people outside Germany. And I might say, the people who came to this conference in Holland were liberals who were anti-Nazis and who belonged to the Niemöller Pastors Emergency League, you would call it, an anti-Nazi organization. At any rate, these people had to come across the border. Now that's very dangerous to have done, especially to attend an international affair against which the Nazis were passionately opposed. So they had crossed in the fields at night, or something of that sort. All foreigners attending the conference had to show their passports, and the police would come at a special time. So the people running the conference said to the people who were Germans and didn't have any passports, you see, you go off into the woods. The police are coming this afternoon, and you people just go off into the woods and stay there a couple of hours.
Pray.
And pray, yes. And we'll come and disturb your prayers, and you can come back to the conference.
Karl Jaspers was on the faculty at Heidelberg University and developed a view of religion much influenced by Greek philosophical thought.
Now, where in those lectures could he have incurred the wrath of the government, leading to his expulsion? That's very unusual to have a German professor expelled. He was not Jewish. He was internationally
His wife
renowned.
was Jewish.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes.
Well, would that be one of the reasons alleged?
That was what was said. There are stories that I have never been able to check. In Heidelberg itself, I haven't checked this, but there were rumors that the police or the Gestapo were going to arrest Frau Jaspers, and you'll see her picture presently, and that Karl Jaspers himself hid her in a large secret closet in this large domicile where they lived, and she didn't come out, and so that if the Gestapo or the police came in to fetch her, they couldn't find her. I had good pictures of Jaspers, as you've seen, in various postures. And what I said to her, I wish that at one point where I'm taking your picture, I could get you to smile. And she responded, there is nothing to smile about. I asked him the question, what significance, in your mind, what significance attaches today to liberal religion? It has no significance, he said in stentorian tones. It went on from there to say that they have keinen Zwang. They have no compulsive, no ironclad commitment. They're movable. They're ambiguous. They can't stand against Hitler. And he said, if I were a young man going into theology as you are, I would not have anything to do with liberal Christianity. I would attach myself to the most orthodox branch of my heritage. And he spelled that out a little bit, but in the terms I've already hinted at. And I, without any intention of being impudent, said to him, is that the policy you're going to follow yourself? Attach yourself to the most orthodox wing of your own heritage. I am not giving you my personal confession. He was really angry. The only time I ever saw this Adonis show any lack of measure that he got from Greek humanism. I am not giving you a personal confession. I am giving you advice from an older man to a younger man, an older man who has learned from the present situation that there is no no hope resides in liberal Christianity.
But integrity was recognized by the people.
A remarkable thing happened on that day when several hundred farmers from the two rural parishes of Pastor Brunner came to greet him on the Sunday after he had been released from Dachau. And they had to find the largest hall in the village in order to make it possible. About 5 or 6 farmers left the hall, and everybody knew what was going to happen except me and Peter Brunner. And they brought in with them a painting that was entirely wrapped in wrapping paper, and in a ceremonial fashion they tore the paper off the painting and then held up the painting. And it was a painting of Jesus in prayer in a hill in Galilee, let's say, with the sheep all around him. And the farmer made a marvelous a comment on the whole thing in presenting this to Brunner, and said, "You have been our true pastor, and you have stood by the word of God and have protected us against this barbarous Nazism." It was simply a tremendous moment. I do not remember a more moving moment when all those people sort of symbolize, you see, the leadership and the authentic leadership of Brunner in standing against the Nazis.